Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to World at War Comics. My next special guest is Emmy Award winning Mr. Marc Guggenheim. And I was telling you before we started the notes that I was taking. I knew I'd be taking some notes, Marc, but man, the things that you've accomplished in a lifetime is absolutely amazing. And then we got stuck talking about Torrent, which I love. And I'm like, we should be recording some of this, Marc. So thank you for spending some time with me. I'm very grateful. But welcome to the show. Hopefully, everything's been going good for you lately.
Yeah, things are good. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. Yeah, no, things are good. I'm fresh, not fresh exactly, but I'm recently back from a lot of travel, New York, for some book signings. Obviously San Diego for Comic-Con. It's been a whirlwind of travel and speeches and interviews and you name it. But things are good. I can't complain.
Yeah. No, I mean, like I said, you've accomplished a lot. I think we should mention that you just had a book come out August 1st.
Yep.
So before we jump into everything you've done in the past, I think, and the story sounds amazing. I just ordered it on Amazon. So it does sound like something that could probably be adapted later on. So the storyline sounds awesome. But yeah,
Yeah.
it is called In Any Lifetime. It sounds like it could be a tearjerker and a lot of other things. You want to talk a little bit about that before I jump into some of your history?
Sure, happy to. It's basically it's a novel about a quantum physicist whose wife dies in a tragic accident, and he is looking for the one parallel universe where she's still alive. So essentially, the antagonist in the story is the multiverse itself, and the multiverse like throws all sorts of things, a rival scientist, earthquakes, another woman in our hero's way, and while we're sort of telling the story in the present day we're flashing back to the protagonist's romance and courtship and eventual marriage to his wife that he lost. And it's getting great, a great response, great feedback. Sales have been fantastic. I could not be happier with the way the book has been received and doing in the marketplace. So I'm excited. And it's funny, like, you asked like, it could be a movie. Like, I get asked that question a lot, and that would be lovely. My attitude is when I write a comic or when I write a novel, I'm really, just looking to write a great comic or a great novel. Like I am looking to tell the story the best way I know how. And if it has like a second life, as some other thing, great, wonderful. I would certainly not complain. But I think, the most important thing is does it work creatively as what it wants to be? I'm very fortunate in the sense that I work in all these different mediums. So if I do if I tell a story in prose as a novel, you can bet it's because that's how I, first, saw the story and how I first, most believe the story needed to be told. Same thing for a comic book or graphic novel or you name it. I'll never turn down a check that might or might not come my way.
Yeah, I think most people would say the same thing. So I think I think that's very relatable. Because you've written on the novel side, you have quite a few, and then obviously you've done comic books. What is your approach to storytelling within those two different genres? And then is there a certain way you do novels that's much different, or do they start kind of the same?
It's funny. So the thing is, my 10,000 hours, the Malcolm Gladwell, 10,000 hours to mastery or expertise. My 10,000 hours are in TV and film. They're in live action, they're in screenplays and teleplays. And at the end of the day, I think no matter what medium I'm working in, I'm instinctively sort of telling the story or I'm seeing the story in my head that way. But I'm very cognizant of changing things up for the medium that I'm specifically working in. For example, like, in TV and film, you have to put everything you want the audience to know or to feel has to be on the screen. There's no internal monologue. There's no internal life for the characters. Whereas in prose, it can be almost all internal monologue. So I have to sort of remind myself when I'm writing prose, because I don't have my 10,000 hours in that medium, that I have just a different set of tools at my disposal. And it's similar with comics, I think a lot, when I'm writing comics in terms of the page turns and the page compositions and, panel layout and, how the story is unfolding in the very specific medium of comics. So I may start out thinking about these stories all the same way, and truth is my notes, my writing process itself are all pretty similar no matter what medium I'm working in. But at some point, in the actual writing, really, the rubber meets the road, and my approach for writing a TV show versus a movie versus a comic book versus a novel, they're all very different, writing exercises.
Have you ever gone into a storyline where you thought it was going to be a novel and it became a screenplay, or a screenplay that became a comic book?
Oh yeah, like actually, like this novel is a good example of that. I played around with this novel as a screenplay. I played around with it as a graphic novel, and it wasn't until the pandemic hit that I allowed myself to think about it as a prose novel. Because the truth is, of all the different mediums that I work in, prose takes the longest and it requires the most focus. And the reason I didn't think to do the, in it, what turned into In Any Lifetime, as a novel first was I just didn't have the time. But the pandemic and lockdown provided me with that time. And it provided me with the time to really approach the story in the way that the story always wanted to be told. But I was kind of reluctant to accept, because accepting it would mean I wouldn't have the time to actually write the darn thing.
Yeah, yeah. As terrible as the pandemic was, which is horrible, hopefully we don't ever go through that again. There are like glimpses of like, well, this was really good for this situation, right? I mean, I got to spend more time with my family.
Oh yeah.
I got to work from home. And then after the pandemic, my company said, we're actually more efficient, which a lot of us already knew, but
Yeah.
and we're not actually more efficient. So now we can work from home a little bit more often. So there were some positives that I think our mind shifted a little bit. It sounds like maybe that was one of them where you were able to take a step back and put more into it.
Oh yeah. I mean, honestly, like, 2019 was a very, very busy year for me. I was working on the second season of Carnival Row, and I was working on the Crisis on Infinite Earths event, and I was dividing my time between Vancouver and Prague. Carnival Row season two and Crisis actually went into production within 24 hours of each other. It was insane. It was a completely insane time. And what the pandemic was great for was allowing me to reconnect with my family, who I hadn't seen much of in the previous year, but also reconnect with my process of writing. One of the great ironies of working in television is you get into television to be a writer, and the longer you work in TV and the more success you have there, you're sort of promoted up the chain past the point where you really get a chance to write. Or finding the time to write is really a struggle. So it was just actually nice to have the quiet. I didn't have notes calls and production calls and budget meetings and all the things that go into being in production. I was able to just go back and focus on being a writer and work on my craft. And that was lovely. That was, I think the pandemic was obviously a horrible thing. But you get, life gives you lemons and you make lemonade. And I definitely think I took proper advantage of, the hopefully once in a lifetime opportunity that lockdown, provided.
Yeah, that's amazing. Can we go into a little bit of the timetable that it takes to put a novel like this together, and then the time frame from a screenplay to go from here I've pitched it to the time that okay it gets picked up to the time that you produce. I mean, I don't think people realize there's years
Oh
sometimes
God.
in that, right?
Years and years. I would say that a feature film from, sale to ultimate, production or wrapping of production, that takes at least 2 years.
Wow.
In the case of In Any Lifetime, the novel, I actually started working on that back in March of 2013, so over 10 years ago. Just, working on the story and writing notes in my notebook about it. And things do take a very, very, very long time typically. And it's one of the things I like about writing in comics is it's far more immediate than pretty much any other medium that I work in. But yeah, you have to really take the long game with TV and film and prose, because it takes a long time to go, even like I said, like the novel I wrote the first draft during the pandemic. That was 2020, and here it just came out in August of 2024. So it takes a long time just to go through the editorial process, and to sort of wait for the proper publishing window with your publisher. All these things, it just taffies out the timeline significantly. So yeah, you've got to keep yourself in good health and really take the long view of things.
Yeah. How, like getting into TV at the very beginning, did you kind of already have an understanding of that, or were you kind of shocked, like, man, everything just takes forever to get anything done because of everything that you mentioned? And how long did it take to get used to it? Like, look, I just did something. It's not going to happen for a few years, so I could relax a little bit.
Well, it's funny. I came of age in television back when their network television was really ascendant, and the development process was actually on the pilot season schedule. And if you sort of look back now, compared to the way things work now, where you could be in development 2 to 4 years before getting anything on the air, um, 1 year for development is rapid fire. It's super
Wow.
fast. Unfortunately, those days are over, even among the networks. Like I did a pilot back in 2022 for ABC, and that was an over 2 year long development process. So yeah, the days of it's just a year, are those
Yeah.
are those are over. Sadly. I think there's a bunch of different reasons why that turned out to be the case, but I miss those days where you weren't stuck in limbo, really working on a project for 2 years without even knowing if it's ever going to see the light of day.
Is there a big difference in timing and easeability between network TV and now some of these streaming? Like, is one easier than the other, or it's all kind of the same now?
I would say it's all kind of the same. I would say that the biggest difference is being in production, because still, for the most part, on network shows, you're in production at the same time you're still writing the season scripts. Whereas in streaming, the orders are short enough, and the time pressure is lower, that you could really write the entire season before you go into production.
Mm.
Um, and that's really, quite frankly, it's good and bad. There's pros and cons to that. It's certainly a lot easier to be, a showrunner of a show that has production separated from the writing process. Network television, especially the 22 episode era, which is over, that's hard. That's high level show running, because you are responsible really for, like, there's about 5 different episodes in different stages at any given moment in the season. It's a lot to deal with. It's a lot to hold in your head. It's a lot to just, make sure that the quality is being kept up across those 5 episodes. It's tricky.
So, how do you balance being a screenplay, producing, writing a comic book, doing a novel? I mean, a lot of these are crossing, or you're doing them all at the same time. Like, how is that humanly possible? And what does a Mark calendar look like during those years when all these things are going on at the same time?
It can get a little crazy. It can get a little crazy. I will say, like, the calendar really changes with what's going on, what I have on my plate. I think the key to doing all those things is to delegate what you can delegate. You know, try to, on the TV side, try to delegate the writing, try to delegate, production stuff and casting stuff. Sometimes you can, and other times it's more challenging. It helps to have a great staff, as I was very lucky to have on all the shows I've showrun. It also, my dirty secret, my superpower is when I do write, I'm pretty fast, and that allows me to it allows me to produce more material than most of my peers can. So that helps a lot. And that speed really came from my background as an attorney. When you're a litigator and you have to write a 50-page brief in a night, you learn how to write fast. You learn how to make decisions quickly. You learn not to. I think a lot of writers, they get caught up in sort of navel gazing and you know, like overthinking things. And a lot of times in writing, you just don't have the opportunity to do that. And I'm also not necessarily convinced that all that navel gazing and second guessing actually leads to a better script at the end of the day.
Mm. Yeah, I could see playing around with it too much probably could add things that were never intended, and then all of a sudden you kind of lose your vision maybe because you keep going back and forth. Have you ever experienced that, or because of what you said? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've definitely overcooked scripts, for sure. And then one of the things I learned early on in my career is that I'm capable of that. I'm capable of overcooking something. I'm capable of not adding too much. My problem is I'll take out too much. I'll think, oh, well, the audience doesn't need to know this because it's implied by this thing over here. And that comes from me being closer to the material than the audience is going to be. But I think, yeah, it's very possible to overcook and overthink. And I've certainly been guilty of that. It's a problem earlier on in my career than, you make that mistake a couple of times and you learn, okay, I'm not gonna do that. You know.
Well, being a litigator, that makes a lot of sense because early on, I feel like this police cop noir, like
Yeah.
really started your career off with CSI, Law and Order, and some of the other projects that you worked on. Obviously, that is a big passion. I think that whole genre,
Oh yeah.
because you see it throughout your career at times pop up. Um, I mean, can you talk a little bit more about how that job had such an influence on what you did as a screenwriter and producer later on?
Oh yeah. I mean, well, first of all, I am generally speaking a huge fan of procedurals and a huge
Yeah.
fan of legal dramas, and cop dramas. That stuff is my jam, and I really do enjoy it. I will say, like, being a litigator, I always say, like, everyone should be a litigator for a year, because I think the things you learn that are so just practical in life are really, really great. Um, like I said, I learned I had, how to write fast. I learned how to negotiate. I learned how to think tactically. As a showrunner and as a producer, like, I use those skills that I developed as an attorney, back, I rely on something I learned as a lawyer, almost every day when I'm show running. Even, the question of, like, how do I manage, so many different projects? That was all, the result of experience managing my caseload. The thing when you're a litigator in real life, it's very different from television. In television, you really get the feeling like each lawyer has only one case at a time, and that's not the way reality works.
And they do no paperwork either, which is amazing
Yeah,
sometimes.
exactly. Exactly. And you do, like, you hold, like, you have like 5 active cases and like a 25 case, caseload. Um, you have to learn how to triage, you have to learn how to, what to prioritize and when to do it and how to time manage. You learn all these, I think, really useful skills, that I it really have made me into not just the writer I am today, but the producer, the showrunner, the director. All the stuff I do is really the result of what I learned back when I was an attorney.
Yeah, incredible. I mean, so you get into TV. I'm a big Green Lantern fan. And so I don't know how
Do I owe
you
you an
like
apology?
that. No, no. So I don't know how often you get this question, and maybe people try to stay away from it. I personally like the movie, and I have a lot of Green Lantern fans where we will rewatch it every once in a while because we enjoyed it. We thought it was great. It was, to see Sinestro at the very end and everything that could have happened after that, which didn't. I blame Ryan Reynolds, who I'm a big fan of, but I blame him for making so many jokes about it that it gets a worse rap than it should, because I think it's a pretty good movie.
It's funny. I actually I don't blame Ryan simply
Okay.
because the rap it got was not the result of jokes that he's made. The rap it got was the result of the way the critics, responded to the movie, and the audience responded to the movie when it first came out. I will say I think it's aged pretty well. I think if you were to, watch the movie today and just grade it against the curve of other superhero movies, I think it stands better than people think. My issue with the movie is it's not the movie we set out to make. Greg Berlanti, Michael Green, and we wrote several drafts that were fundamentally just a different movie, a more grounded movie. I think a movie with a lot more emotion to it, a lot less, sort of silliness. But that's what happens in features. In features, you write a script and you sort of, you hand it off to the director. And, in the case of Green Lantern, they brought in another writer to, quote unquote, polish it. And that's just life in the big city. That's how things go. But I think, looking back on it, like I think there's sequences in it that work really well. I think, I compare it to a lot of other movies that are better regarded, that I go, I think Green Lantern's at least better than that. But it's very funny. Like I um I have a difficult time, in a good way and a bad way, remaining invested in the stuff that I do once it comes out. Once the baby is born and goes off into the world, I'm just focused on the next thing. I'm really sort of, moving on to the next thing. And I do appreciate the fact that Ryan is actually, with his jokes, he's managed to keep it in the zeitgeist a lot
Yeah.
longer than I think would have had any right to be in. So there's something really nice about that. And I think, yeah, I think the movies, I think it's aged very well. Surprisingly well.
Did you have anything to do with the writing of the video game that followed the movie?
No, no, I didn't.
Because
It's funny.
that was a pretty popular game. It's
It
a fun
was.
game. Yeah.
It was, and I wanted to be involved because I was, especially at the time I wrote video games. It was
Yeah. I saw that. Yeah.
and it would have been great to be involved, but just wasn't for what. No, I never got that phone call. Um, but yeah, that really was a really great video game. And it's funny. Greg Berlanti got an Xbox 360 that was like wrapped with the poster from the movie,
Oh,
as
cool.
part of promotion of the video game. And I always would like look over to it, in his office, going like, I want that. Maybe he won't notice if I walk out with
Now, what is the difference between video game writing? Because that's the one area that I know nothing about. Do you write it like a screenplay? Like, how does that work out, and how does that turn into a video game?
It's funny. It all depends.
Mm.
And what it depends upon is what is the relationship with the developer? When in the process am I being brought on? How am I working with the programmers? I've worked on games where, the writer is sort of an afterthought, and I'm brought in really at the 11th hour to try to, craft a story out of what is fundamentally a lot of interconnected or disconnected action sequences. There's other times where I'm actually, like, my office is in the same office as the developer. Like that was Call of Duty 3, which was a great experience where, like, I was writing essentially the cutscenes while they were working on the levels. And what was really terrific about that collaboration was if I had an idea, I was able to run down the hall and share it with the programmers, and vice versa. So that was a very, synergistic kind of relationship. But yeah, for the most part, the video game work really depends upon the nature of the game and the nature of the relationship you have with the developer. Sometimes you're hired on by the publisher and you're sort of foisted onto the developer, and it's kind of like a shotgun marriage, and that doesn't always work too well. They don't really want the Hollywood writer there.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, fortunately, like that was, that those moments those instances were sort of few and far between. For the most part, my video game experiences were really, really great. And you get to work with a group of very creative, very talented people in essentially a really, vibrant and sort of cutting edge medium. I think, especially when I was doing it, um, video games were just getting to the point where technologically you could really tell a real story and you could get actual emotion with the motion capture and everything. And it's exciting, when you work in, comic books or film or television or prose. Those are mediums that have been around in some cases for hundreds of years. So it's fun to do that, but it's not fun in the same way. Like video games, it's like you're at the cusp of something. You are at the bleeding edge of a medium that is still evolving and still trying to find itself and is still, changing as technology changes.
Yeah.
So there's something very exciting about that, to me.
Yeah, I mean, you're watching ESPN and you're watching these gamers compete against each other in front of 25,000 people. Like, who would have thought video games would become what it is today? It's one of the fastest growing sports if you consider it
Yeah.
a sport. ESPN does, so I guess it's a sport now, right?
I grew up with an Atari 2600.
Yeah.
So, I grew up with like these, 6-bit, pixels that, or maybe it was 4-bit even, where you didn't even know what you were looking at half the time. So it's amazing to see that medium evolve and grow, and we're just at the beginning. I think, I think as time goes by, you're going to see even bigger quantum leaps forward, especially with AI coming into the mix and, like advances in augmented reality and virtual reality. It's a very exciting time.
A little scary too, I think. As a father of four, even though my kids are adults, I have my first grandchild.
Wow.
Like, will we ever see them? I mean, to just be kind of in
It's
this fake world, just living it out. I don't know. It's a little nerve wracking. Great for another book, a novel, though.
Yeah, no, I think technology is interesting because it gives and it takes, and it's
Yeah.
definitely a double-edged sword. And you know, I think a lot of people are always scared about new technology. And I think, fear is not a helpful emotion in this context because, the advance of technology, it's like the weather, it's like, it's not something that's within any of our control. So, being afraid of it, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of ROI on that emotion. But I understand it. I've got two, teenage daughters myself, and, I just see like how much, the smartphone and social media has changed not just them, but the world. And when you factor in AI and virtual reality and augmented reality into all that, it's heady times, very heady
Yeah.
times.
Absolutely. All right, let's switch over to comic books because you've touched quite a few amazing, whether it's X-Men, obviously Aquaman, obviously Torrent, which we have back here, Star Wars. Like you've touched a lot of different IPs within comic books that are just phenomenal. Do you have a favorite comic book that you grew up on coming into comics? And were you ever able to write on a title that you grew up with that you always dreamed about?
Yeah, I have to say that was X-Men for me.
Yeah, yeah.
X-Men, I was such a huge fan. I was of the John Byrne, Chris Claremont, era and beyond, to Dave Cockrum 2.0 and Paul Smith and Mark Silvestri and Jim Lee. But like, and I was a comic book fan before discovering the X-Men, but when I discovered the X-Men, it was like it really was like it was like rediscovering comics, quite frankly. And the chance to write the X-Men, um, I'm still pinching myself that I got as much opportunity to write the X-Men as I have. And it's one of those, I think, very lucky things. I always say, like, I work for 10-year-old me. Does 10-year-old me think this would be cool? That's usually how I decide whether or not to take a gig. And 10-year-old me couldn't be happier.
Well, then we have Torrent, which you and I were kind of talking about before we jumped on, which is this is your title. I had Justin Greenwood on because I enjoyed it so much, and I love his art, by the way. I think he's a fantastic guy. He's incredible.
Oh my God, the best.
Yeah, just amazing guy. But the storyline around it is pretty awesome. Was this? I can't remember. Was this your first forte into creator owned, or did you have something
No.
before this? I can't remember.
No, I had a couple of things before that.
What was it?
Justin and I had worked on two creator owns prior to this. One was
Okay.
Production about life after an alien invasion.
Oh,
The
okay.
other was Stringers about freelance videographers in Los Angeles.
Mm.
And I'd also done a graphic novel called Halcyon with my wife for Image. I've done a few. And
Yeah, yeah,
the funny thing is that um, my New Year's resolution of 2020 was I wanted to do more creator-owned books. It had
yeah,
been a while since I'd done anything creator-owned. And then the pandemic happened, and that really sort of freed me up time-wise to develop several creator-owned books. And one of them was Torrent because Justin and I really wanted to work together again. And I had this idea, I sort of wanted, it originally started out as like an exercise, like, is it possible to take a Spider-Man type character and essentially turn him into the Punisher? But of course, the idea, as ideas are wont to do, evolved sort of past that, and I think became an interesting sort of examination of what does justice look like,
yeah.
and and a lot of it was a return to a lot of the themes that I had written about when I was doing Arrow. Um, and working with Justin, is always just such a privilege because he is a delightful guy, but he's also such a great dynamic artist who, just imbues each page with so much life and verve to
Yeah,
it, that it's fun to write for him, quite frankly.
yeah,
I can see the pages in my mind's eye, with a lot of clarity, and just know, like, oh, okay, this I know what I have a feeling I know what Justin's going to do with this sequence, and that's just delightful, and a
yeah.
wonderful creative experience. And we had a blast with that book, and it was really well received too.
Mhm.
It's sort of like I you know we were saying before the Zoom that it's very hard to do a non-DC, non-Marvel superhero property these days. And I think the book kind of developed this cool cult status, of a book that, it is like a whole sort of superhero universe that we had to create in order to tell the story we wanted to tell. But it's a very, we're relying on a lot of the archetypes from DC and Marvel, but we're putting such a different spin on them that it really becomes its own animal. And that was a great deal of fun for us.
Yeah, I feel like live action. We had a really good 20-year run there, and everything is really slowed down. You see that Disney's been struggling with some of the even Disney Plus stuff they put out, and of course, Deadpool comes and blows that all out of the water. So, but where I found that comic books have really thrived is in animation. So we
Yeah.
just saw the new Batman drop August 1st. You see what
Yep.
they're doing with Invincible, with
Yeah.
Skybound. Have you thought about taking something and maybe live action isn't the right thing, but maybe animation? And I think Torrent would be perfect for that, just because of
That's
the
interesting.
fight
Yeah.
sequences that take place, the storyline, the character development. Some of the things that happen within the comic book in live action might be a little bit difficult and expensive
Yeah.
to do, but in
Yep.
animation, it could be done. And animation, I feel, is where it's at right now for comic book stories. And I think manga And
Yeah.
everything that has happened in that world, in that space, has really helped comic books find another avenue to tell that story and something that you could watch as opposed to read.
Absolutely. You know, it's funny. I haven't thought about doing Torrent as an animated show, but I love that idea. You know, it's kind of funny. Maybe I'm doing it wrong, but when I do a creator-owned comic, I don't think ahead to whether or not it can be a TV show or a movie.
Mm.
I, you know, my goal is to tell the story, and my goal is to tell the story, if it's a comic book or if it's a novel, as the best comic book or the best novel that I can do. And if it has a second life, you know, in another medium, wonderful, great. I'll never say no to that. But you know, it's funny, a lot of times people will say like, well, do you want to adapt it? You know, because I do work in these other mediums. Like, do you want to adapt it? And I'm like, I think I'd rather someone else did,
Yeah.
because I've already scratched the itch. I've already told the story. I've done the creative thing. And that being said, I have been in situations where recently where I've been hired to adapt my own work. Too Dead to Die, which is a graphic novel I did with Howard Chaykin for Image. I wrote that as a movie for Universal, and I'm adapting another creator-owned book as a limited series for Netflix. And it's it's interesting. It's like I said, it's not always my personal preference to do that, but I I find it to be an interesting exercise, you know, as someone who has made so much of their career adapting other people's material and saying in public a lot of things about my philosophy about adapting and how you can't be like 100% faithful to the source material. Well, now I'm being asked to sort of walk my own talk. And it's interesting. It's very, very interesting. I will
Wait,
say,
can I,
like, yeah.
with your experience though, Mark, does that make you a little bit nervous or not really? To
No, you know
adapt
what?
your own stuff and be kind of held to that fire now.
You know, because you know what it's turned out is I really have, you know, the philosophies I've developed over the years about adapting things, actually they apply to my own stuff too. And you know, I'm able to kind of separate the comic book writer in me from the screenwriter in me. And you know, screenwriter Mark then gets involved and does what screenwriter Mark has to do. And comic book Mark can take a seat. Um, and even like the limited series for Netflix, it's you know, it's not it's not exactly the same as the graphic novel I'm adapting. I am definitely I'm taking artistic liberties with my own material. Again, simply because I don't believe that a one-to-one translation of any story from medium A to medium B is possible. I think,
Yeah.
you know, and to the extent it's possible, I don't think it's desirable. You know, because I think you're not taking advantage of the strengths of the medium that you're adapting into. Um, so, you know, and that's why the idea of doing Torin as an animated is very interesting to me, because I see animation not as a genre but as a medium. You
Mm.
know, it's just another way to tell a story. And some things really lend themselves to being told in animated form, others not so much.
Yeah.
But I think Torrent, yeah, would function really, really well as an animated series. You know, if you're if you're Netflix or Amazon, or if anyone who does, give me a call. Let's talk.
I think it would be amazing. It's one of those that I think would be really hard as live action. Even I
Right.
know Robert Kirkman has been talking about taking Invincible and making it live action, but I've read that whole 144 issues there, and even on the animated series, there's portions of fight scenes that would be so expensive to do, like the train where they're going through car by car and they're just people dying, and that's just I don't know how they would adapt that in live action. I guess you could with CGI, but I would think it would be super expensive.
It would, and I also think there's a market reality that has to be dealt with, which is that, for these big budget properties, the studios, they're not willing to spend that kind of money
Yeah.
on something that's not DC or Marvel.
Yeah. Good
Um,
point.
that's a big piece of it. Also, like, if it's a superhero property of any kind, you're basically already essentially you're deprived of 2/5 of the market, because Warner Brothers isn't going to commission anything that's not based on a DC property, and Disney's not going to commission anything that's not based on a Marvel property. So,
Yeah.
you're very limited in terms of the buyers that you can actually pitch to.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Yeah. I mean, that's where I guess Netflix and Amazon, they realize that, right? And so you see
Mhm.
like Mark Miller signing this big contract with Netflix.
Yep.
You're seeing Robert Kirkman going with Amazon. And I'm sure there's some kind of agreement where other properties, whether Firepower or some of the other things that he's done might be also translated into animation or live action. I feel with your experience, Mark, you would have to have an open door to at least have that conversation with
Oh,
everything that you accomplished and being an Emmy award winning at it as well. You know what I mean? I would think it would be easiest for you, but I know nothing about the industry.
it's funny. I don't think anything right now in the industry is easy for anybody.
Yeah,
I, my attitude tends to be that, you know, the things that are meant to be are meant to be. Like, the opportunities that come about, they come about really because, um, you know, someone out there other than me wants to make the thing. Very rarely does a project, reach the public simply because of the passion of the creator. It requires a few more people believing in it than just that.
yeah. And it's a business, right? So the dollars and cents have to make
It's
sense first before anything else, right?
especially these days where it's all dollars and cents and very little comes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and again, like you said, we're in this kind of dip. Obviously, Deadpool is this anomaly, but we're kind of in a dip when it comes to it. I don't know if it's, some people call it hero fatigue, but I'm not sure what it is. Storytelling, you hear all these different things that come back, and it's a lot of noise. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but certainly there's been a dip, right?
Oh, there's definitely been a dip. I don't think it's superhero fatigue. I mean, you certainly can't make a claim to superhero fatigue when Deadpool Wolverine is doing so
Yeah,
well. I think what it really is that now, nowadays you just can't count on the audience. Like, you have to bring the goods. You've got to have a movie or a TV show that's actually good.
yeah,
Whereas in the past, I think, during the height of the superhero bubble, um, you know, everyone was watching and going to everything just
yeah.
because, it enjoyed that level of affection in the zeitgeist. But now, people are like, no, you gotta win me. You gotta win me
Yeah.
over. And if I hear it's a really great movie, I'll go. It's just not. So it's not that I say it's not superhero fatigue. It's just bad movie fatigue.
Good
There
point.
were just
Yeah.
there were just too many mediocre, not even bad, but just mediocre superhero
Yeah.
movies. And the audience, reacts with their dollars or lack thereof. And they said, no, I need to be astonished. I need something, a little more than just, a name. I need to know that it's going to be a really entertaining TV series or a really entertaining movie.
Well, you had quite the run when it came to the WB with Arrow and what was it, Legends? I mean,
Legends.
yeah, tomorrow, yeah. I mean, you did pretty well, and you could see Disney Plus, I think, was trying to copy a lot of that, and from a storytelling standpoint, I think maybe it just fell a little short. Again, no, I don't want to talk bad about anything. Some of them I enjoyed that others didn't. Some people like something that I didn't, so it goes back and forth to each
Yeah,
their
totally.
own. But you had quite the run there. And then the rumor was that a Green Lantern series was going to come out. And then
Yeah.
obviously everything changed at WB. And I certainly don't want to get into the weeds of something that maybe you're not comfortable, but I always wanted to know, what was your vision for
Oh,
that Green Lantern series, if you could even talk about that.
it was going to be outstanding. I mean, it really
Yeah.
was. Honestly, it was going to be we were gonna finally do Green Lantern right. And it took place in two time periods. It took place with Alan Scott in the 1940s and Guy Gardner in the 1980s. And we had the artist who does the costumes for the boys, and we had the production designer who is oh my God, why am I blanking on his name? Um, there's a great director who, of course, I'm blanking on, who he works on all of his films, Oscar-winning
Mm.
films. As our production designer, we were just friggin' killing it. I have all this concept art in my computer that I'm dying to show people because you would have been blown away by it. And it was a really great, yeah, it was just a really great series. And, fundamentally, it's funny, like we kept getting notes back from HBO saying, you know, that had us going like, oh, it seems like what they really want is True Detective with power rings. And you know, that's a perfectly valid take on the whole Lantern mythos. It just wasn't the take we were interested in. It just wasn't the
Mm.
show we were interested in doing. So that when, James Gunn took over the DC properties and announced Lanterns and literally said it's True Detective with power rings, we were like, okay, well, that's what clearly the studio wants. Our instinct about what they wanted was not off by any stretch of the imagination. It just didn't align with what we wanted to do,
Yeah.
which that happens. And obviously our show would have been far more expensive, and far more challenging on a production level. But I really believed in the team we had assembled. We really had put together some incredible writers, but also actors and department heads who we were really going to do it right. We were
Wow.
working with Weta Digital. We were working, with people who, did, when we wanted the aliens to be as practical as possible. So we were working with makeup artists and prosthetic experts. It was going to be, CG when necessary, but not C. It wasn't going to be a CG fest. It was gonna be pretty friggin' awesome. It was. I can't speak for Greg Berlanti, but I sort of saw it as our opportunity to do Green Lantern the way we originally intended to do Green Lantern, and sort of there was a little bit of a possibility of some redemption, but not meant to be, and you move on to the next thing.
Do you think there will be a time where some of the stuff that you did work on, whether it's costume design, will be released, or WB owns that and it can't be shared? And 'cause
You
I've
know,
heard that too, where go ahead,
you know,
sorry.
it's funny. I mean, technically, Warner Brothers owns all of it. If I were to, put it on Instagram, I don't think there's anything legally they could do to me.
Yeah.
And you see that happen, right? Like, Colin Trevorrow released the concept art for his ninth Star Wars film. And the world kept spinning. Everyone was fine. I generally don't do it
Yeah.
because it's just not the way things are done, in Hollywood. And I always sort of try to conduct myself in as professional a manner as possible. And part of being professional is you follow the custom and practice of the industry you're in. And the custom and practice of Hollywood is you don't really talk about Fight Club.
Yeah.
And It's a shame because I would love to, don't get me wrong. But it's also, I'm not the artist behind a lot of these pieces. So, it'd be one thing if I was releasing my own artwork, that I did, but that wouldn't be the case in this instance. So, there's that other factor out there.
Probably why you've been so successful in Hollywood, is you don't do things that would anger
And
a
you know,
lot
I,
of
I
people that make those decisions, right?
I'm human. I get tempted like
Yeah,
anybody else.
for sure.
And
Especially when you got some secret stuff that you think people would be interested in.
oh,
Like, this is
just
good stuff. I want the
dying
world to
to,
see.
yeah, yeah. That's the thing. You just want to you want people to see the great work that's been done. We worked on that show for several years, and a lot of people worked very, very hard on it. And but that is the nature of Hollywood, especially these days, where you'll do a lot of work that doesn't see the light of day. That's just, that's life in the big city.
Yeah, yeah. Did you ever get to the part where you were already shooting and there was
No,
already film done? Oh, okay.
no, no. We finished all 8 episodes, the scripts for all 8 episodes. But it was actually like, I think the plug got pulled just a few weeks after we finished the eighth script, 8 of 8.
Yeah, yep, that happens, like you said, in Hollywood. I think from a
Especially
fan's
more and more you,
perspective, yeah,
yeah,
from a fan's
especially more and more
perspective,
you
it's
see it.
like devastating, right? But for someone like you, this has probably happened 100 times where you worked on something and it never came to life. That's just how it works, right?
I think, the truth of the matter is that you end up, especially again, especially these days, you end up working on more things that don't see the light of day than the ones that do.
Yeah,
That's just the nature of the biz. And like I said, especially recently,
yeah.
it wasn't, it was always like this, but not to such an extent. But industries evolve, they change, they go through ups and downs, and they go through, certain periods where, a certain way of working is ascendant, and that gets replaced with a different way of working eventually. So it just happens to be a function of the period of time that we're in.
Yeah, I had the opportunity. I had a back surgery, so I went to San Diego Comic-Con, but I could only spend a couple hours walking. So I had spinal issue.
Oh yeah.
But I had the opportunity to meet Derek Kolstad, who you
Oh yeah.
probably know, who has written John Wick,
Oh yeah.
right? The creator and writer.
I never had the chance to meet him.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe you bumped shoulders with him
No, I
over your
know.
time in the career.
Yeah, no, actually, I would. He's one of those guys I actually would like to meet and
Yeah,
shit with. But because I'm a big fan of his work.
yeah.
And it's funny. Like I think the closest we came was we both had lunch at the same restaurant in Burbank. And he's like a couple of tables away, and he's talking about Falcon and Winter Soldier, and I really wanted to just like go over and eavesdrop on the whole conversation.
Yeah, I think he said he helped produce 2 episodes on that. But I bring him up because he was talking about John Wick, right? He creates this amazing franchise. He gets to the third movie that he's still involved with, and after that, they said, "We're good. We don't need your services anymore." And to me, that would be absolutely devastating. But
I
his
know.
reaction to it was just like, "That's just how it works, right? That you come to a certain point, and to cut costs, like we know exactly where we want to go for the next 2 movies." And I only bring that up because I mean, to be 8 episodes in, and now you're ready to start filming, like the devastation, like I don't know if I can handle that, but I guess when you're in the industry long enough, you just realize that nothing is 100%, right? Just the way it goes.
I it's true. I mean, the funny thing is that for me, it's not the devastation that's so hard to deal with. It's the how do I as a creative get the juices flowing for something that I know may never see the light of day. That's
Wow.
the real challenge. The real challenge is getting myself to a place where I'm feeling creatively passionate to do the job I need to do, while still knowing that that passion is pretty irrational. And that's a that that's been an interesting journey. Trying to get myself to that place and sort of figure that aspect of my career and my artistic voice out.
Yeah. Have you seen that same thing happen on the comic book side of your creations, or it's much easier to be able to tell a story and there's a little bit less obstacles, I would say?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, like, creator-owned comics, no one's giving me any notes, no one's changing it, turning it into the thing it, didn't want to be. I've been very fortunate when I've done work for hire work for Marvel or DC, or Lucasfilm, or Paramount in the case of Star Trek. I've been very, very lucky that I have been working with people who we're all trying to tell the best story possible, and we're all on the same page as to what that story should be. And yes, there's rights holders who have, not a different agenda, but they have a competing agenda sometimes in terms of like, they got to think of an entire franchise. They're not thinking about one comic book story. And I'm very lucky that everyone I've worked with, from Paramount to Lucasfilm to Marvel to DC, they're all like just good people who love the thing that we're trying to make. And the notes are coming from this very positive, beneficial place, that basically it's very hard to get angry. It's really, really difficult. Like, to be able to work with people who love the thing as much as you do, that's the real blessing. Oftentimes in Hollywood, I'm working with people who actually don't love the thing the way I love it, and they're, in some cases, they're actually embarrassed by it. Like, oh, how are we going to make this cool? How are we going to, like, I'm like, if you're starting off with how are we going to make this cool, instead of this is so cool, you're done before you even start. And those are the people who, I find I have the most difficulty working with, because if you don't come at these things from a place of love, I think I think you failed even before you've begun.
Such a good point. Such a good point. And I think even outside of film, right? If that's your attitude in life in general, and what you do
Yeah,
for a
totally.
living, life's going to be tough, man, because you're going to
Right.
always be miserable.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, you're gonna get, kicked, you're gonna get kicked down more than you get lifted up in life, and I think you've got to just, yeah, it's how you deal with the setbacks in life is far more important and predictive of future success than how you deal with the successes.
Yeah.
And I, I think you've got to just, you got to figure out what works for you. I've had a lot of therapy. I'm still in therapy. Like, this is something
Mm,
it's constantly a work in progress on.
yeah.
But I think, learning how to deal with adversity, learning how to deal with disappointment, um, you know, and figuring out a way to keep moving forward, I think it's a very, very, very valuable lesson.
Yeah, yeah. Couldn't agree with you more. Couldn't agree with you more. Sorry to hear that. But I guess it's helping quite a bit, and that's amazing.
Oh
And that's
yeah,
the
yeah.
main thing, right? But
I'm a big
that
believer
helps a
in
lot
therapy.
of people. Well, I think it's such a big deal for you to come out and say that, because I think a lot of us have things that we're working through, and sometimes you need a little bit more support than what you could provide for yourself. And I think
Yeah,
that
I
stigma
think
has kind of gone a lot over the last few
it
years,
has.
because so much of us can now finally realize, like, I'm not that healthy in a lot of different areas, and I can't figure it out on my own, right? And so I need some help.
Well, if you weren't physically healthy, you would go to a doctor. Mental
Yeah,
health is no different from physical health. In
agree.
fact, I could make the argument that it's actually more important. Because bad mental health will have physical consequences.
Yeah,
And I think, yeah, I'm a huge believer in therapy. I'm a huge believer in getting treatment and getting help. I do think that, especially these days, we're coming out of a pandemic where, I think it's sort of traumatized everyone in different ways, and in ways that we don't even know yet and we don't fully understand. I think mental health is incredibly, incredibly important. I'm a very, very, very big believer in it.
yeah. I'm so glad that you said that, Mark. I think everyone needs to hear that and know it's okay. Because it's, like I said, it's
Yeah.
so normal. If I hurt my arm, I go to the doctor, right? But
That's
if
the
I'm
thing,
emotionally got an issue, like, oh, don't say that you get therapy. Like,
right.
wait a minute, how is that not the same, right?
But I do see
Uh,
that stigma, like you said, it's going away, which is great.
yeah,
It's really, really nice
yeah.
to see.
It really is. Mark, I've spent a lot of time with you. I really appreciate it. Can you, like, whatever you're able to share, like, obviously we have in any lifetime that just dropped August 1st. So it is out. It sounds like an amazing storyline. Can't wait to get my copy of it that I ordered on Amazon. But is there anything else that you're working on that you kind of are able to share or wanted to share? I'm sure you got things cooking that you can't speak about, which is very normal, but I didn't know if there was anything else that you wanted to share.
I think, the only two things I can really talk about are, I did a story called Beware the Planet of the Apes for Marvel a couple of months ago, and the trade paperback is coming out later this month.
Nice.
So that's worth checking out. And I am working on a new Star Wars story. It hasn't been announced yet,
Okay.
so I can't say what it is or even what era it's in, but I'm having an absolute blast with it, and I'm really excited for the way it's coming together. I think it's, it's gonna be, it feels like the most Star Wars thing of any Star Wars thing I've done, which is very exciting for me. But and sadly, yeah, I can't talk about anything else
Yeah.
because everything else is under that cone of silence.
Yep.
But I do publish a weekly newsletter called Legal Dispatch on Substack. So if you go to markguggenheim.substack.com, that's where I talk about stuff I'm working on. That's where I, list conventions I'm going to, books of mine that are coming out. So if you're someone who's interested in my work and you want to know, you want to get heads up on what's happening, that's a good source to go to.
Yeah, I follow you. We conversated through Substack, so I'll make sure I put the link below, Mark. That way, it makes it easy for everyone to go over and subscribe. But I really enjoy it. Mark, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you allowing me to spend time and entrusting me with all of your stories and everything that you've accomplished. It's quite a bit. Really, we could probably talk for the next 2 or 3 hours on all the stuff that you accomplished. And we didn't even talk about, like, this runs in the family. There's other people
Oh
in
yeah,
your
yeah, I
family
got
that
two
do
brothers
this.
who do this too.
Yeah, which is
Well,
just mind blowing, man.
yeah, my parents are still wondering where they went wrong. But this has been a lot of fun. I really, really appreciate the chance to talk to you, and I appreciate everyone listening.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Hope we could do this again another
Yeah, let's
time
go.
as more and more of your stuff come out. But I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and I thank you very much for your time today.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks so
All
much.
right,
Take care. More
take
coming.
care.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.